Please welcome the President of the United States, Thaddeus McCotter. How does that sound? Michigan Congressman Thaddeus McCotter is saying that the biggest factor determining whether he'll run for president is his family. He's going to have a conversation with his wife and 3 kids about the impact of seeking the highest office in the land and what it would mean to them. He's 45 years old. He says it's a difficult decision to make. He's a Livonia Republican, and he's going to make a quick yes or no, as we understand. Dan Perot, who was the chief of staff for Governor John Engler and ran the Lamar Alexander for President campaign, is on the other end of our line this morning. Good morning to you.
Hey, good morning. Well, there's not very much good about it with the rain. It's like Ireland.
Yeah, it's exhausting, isn't it, this
Yes,
weather?
it is.
I mean, it's enough already. We're into late May, and it still feels like April, or worse.
It does. But I think Congressman McCotter, the music he played is probably about as close as he's going to get.
Well, what was your immediate knee-jerk reaction when you heard he was thinking about running for president?
My knee hit me in the face.
Me too. I was like, what? And you should have heard Mike
you know.
Rogers yesterday. Mike Rogers was on the show, the congressman from Brighton, and I says, well, what do you think his chances are? And he says, why? Is he thinking of running? And I said, yeah. And he said, wow.
Well, he ought to be. He ought to feel pretty good that there are those who believe that he's got the intellectual heft to be president of the United States, and there are those conservatives in Washington who believe that, and he is a very smart man.
Yeah.
What he lacks to be a candidate is, frankly, his personality.
Yeah.
And he has no ability to raise money. I mean, he has been one of the worst. He has one of the worst track records in Congress of raising money, and he hasn't played in the sandbox well with other Republicans when it comes to political campaigns. And so he's sort of isolated himself over his time in Congress, and now to try to bust out and to go ask for help, it's going to be very hard for him.
He's a testy sort of, I don't know, acerbic fellow. But sometimes he can be very dry, and he can seem almost like a zealot. Am I wrong in my assessment?
No, not at all. And that's one of the when he's talking to his family, he ought to have a conversation with himself, and really ask himself does he have the kind of personality that you can take into an Iowa and take into New Hampshire and connect with people one-on-one, because that's what those 2 states are all about. And it's being in the living rooms. It's going to the fish fries. It's going to the state fairs and mixing and mingling. And he's never had a history of doing that. And now to suddenly go do that, it's very difficult. And I just don't think he can. And he can't raise money. I mean, he's got to raise money at about $250,000 a pop a day, practically. And he's never raised that amount of money in his life.
So if he's a smart man, he knows all that. Why is he making all? Do you think he's just sort of getting a little bit of attention for himself at the moment?
Well, no, I don't think he brought. I mean, I think he's like the old seaman, that we've read about that's been at sea for a long time, and he's got the lure of the mermaids. I mean, there are those who are saying, and it's not so much about him, I think, as it says about about our party, the concern that many in our party have about the list of candidates we have running. And so they're constantly looking. I think we've got some pretty good people out there, and Governor Planning, Governor Romney, and Newt Gingrich, and others. But it says more about the state of the list of candidates than it does, I think, about Thaddeus. And the fact that there's a group of conservatives that think he'd be a great president. Maybe they think he would be, but he ought to just listen to your music, because that's as close as he's going to get.
Mitt Romney's eating a little bit of crow these days. After all, Chrysler paid back the government yesterday, GM as well, and now we remember that Mitt Romney wrote that op-ed piece. The headline was, "Let Detroit Go Broke." Remember that?
Well, I do, but I do think at the same time that the governor and others who really did oppose the bailouts, I mean, who's to say that letting the situation go its own way without the government involvement wouldn't have worked better, wouldn't have worked quicker. And I think we're all glad and happy that folks are working, that we didn't lose more jobs. But the fact of the matter that the government extracted a lot from these companies that and perhaps others would say perhaps not enough that they would have gotten had it been resolved in the private sector. I think that's the whole debate about how much do we want government to continue to be involved in our lives, and I think the Governor Romney's got a good case to make there.
Dick Morris, the political consultant, was in Michigan, and he said, quote, "Rick Snyder needs to get his DNA checked to see if there is any Republicanism in there. He's questioning the governor's credentials based on his support of the tax hike on seniors and business, is what he called it. I presume he means the pension tax, and he's also involved in that Ambassador Bridge second span between Detroit and Windsor. What do you make of Rick Snyder needing his DNA checked?
I think Rick Snyder is going to go down as perhaps one of our best governors. I mean, this is a man who's come to office with really owing no one anything, and he has really, in the first 4 months of his administration, done more perhaps even than Governor Engler was able to do in the first 4 years of putting Michigan back on track. I think, Dick Morris is a hired gun. For him to come in from out of state, he couldn't find the thumb of Michigan without a map. And to suggest this about our governor, I think this goes to show that he's out of touch with Michigan, and his own concern is about his client. I know Matty Maroon. Matty Maroon's a great man. I mean, he's the man who's pushing the private option on the bridge. And this is a political fight, and that's the kind of political stuff you say when you're in the middle of a brawl.
All right. Thank you very much for the early chat this morning. We sure appreciate it. And keep the raindrops from falling on your head.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to get on me. I tell you, I'm not going out.
Okay. Smart way to go about it. Dan Perot from the American Justice Partnership, who was Governor Engler's chief of staff and also ran the Lamar Alexander for President campaign. It is 9 minutes before the hour. The full sports story coming up shortly. And also, turns out that Kim Kardashian is getting engaged. 20.5 carat engagement ring. We'll hear more about that. And a guy who knows her future father-in-law. What does he think of having Kim Kardashian as a daughter-in-law? Stay tuned. It's Michael Patrick Shields, Michigan's Morning Show.